myself. I've been writing the column for 23 years almost. We all have been on a journey around trans issues and know more now and are more sensitive to these issues now than we were a dozen years ago or 22 years ago. So I've certainly wrote things in the past from a place of misinformation and prejudice and assumptions that I no longer would write things that way. And I think that's true of anybody who's been writing about sex for as long as I have. I've also, though, been quoting in my column and handing my column over to people like Buck Angel and Kate Bornstein since the mid-90s. I've been giving a platform to trans writers and thinkers in my column to communicate not just to other queers, but to other straights from the very beginning of my column. So it always sort of created this platform and then empowered trans people to step up onto that platform and speak for themselves. And you can go on my archive and you can see those columns going back forever. So what I would say to them, though, or the people who hate me, is often what they say is, "Oh, you're a gay, white, cisgendered, able-bodied, thin, privileged, heteronormative, gay white man, and you speak for gay white men." You know who hated me first? Gay white men. Gay men. Gay men really hated me first, because in the 90s, during the worst of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, early 90s and mid-90s, before the drug cocktails came online, I was writing things that just made gay men furious. I said back before the drug cocktail that the AIDS crisis was no longer a crisis. It was still an epidemic, but it was not a crisis anymore, not a health crisis. Because now that we know what we know about HIV, I wrote at the time, you get infected two ways: stupidity, bad luck. And your stupidity or your bad luck is not everybody's health crisis anymore. And I said shit like that, and gay men's heads exploded. I also said to people with HIV, when people with HIV were the baby harp seals of the queer movement, we have these waves of baby harp seals in the queer movement, right? And many years ago, before it was people with HIV, it was lesbians, because at first the gay movement was very much about gay men, and then lesbians said, "Don't call us gay, we're lesbians," and these fractures broke up early gay rights organizations because they were too male-dominated, and then lesbian separatism rose out of that, and that was lesbians being the baby harp seals. Then gay men with HIV were the baby harp seals. Now it's sort of trans and asexuals were like having these waves of the baby harp seal that you can't say anything to that's remotely discouraging because they've suffered so much, right? Even been marginalized in the queer community itself. But, at that time when having HIV made you the baby harp seal, because you were going to die and everything had to be a Make-A-Wish Foundation day for you because you had HIV, there were people out there with HIV who were having unprotected sex and felt that if someone would allow them not to use a condom, it wasn't their job to come out as having HIV or to use a condom, because we're all supposed to take responsibility for ourselves. So if you'll let me have sex with you without a condom, it's not my responsibility as an HIV positive person to inform you I have HIV so you can make an informed choice about whether to have unprotected sex with me, or to act in the interest of your health. And this was going on, and this was justified. There were writers who would justify this. There were a lot of people in HIV organizations who would justify that. And there I was saying, this is shockingly immoral. And just because you have HIV doesn't give you a get out of basic human decency free card. And gay men with HIV hated me. So what I would say to your friends is, gay men hated Dan first. Eventually everybody hates me, And I have to you write a sex ethics column. You have to sort of weigh in on things that, for a lot of people who are lefty, sex radical, queers, they want to treat it as very black and white. Like, I've had to field questions from people who present a situation and say, "This is what happened, was I raped?" And you're not allowed to say no now anymore to that question, right? You weren't even allowed then. And so what do you do with that? And there's a lot of dishonest shit floating around there on Tumblr. I once wrote a column where I had a series of columns where there's debate about whether this thing that happened, whether regret sex made it rape. And there's a great piece on Salon right now about that very issue. But it was roaring through Savage Love about 12 years ago, whether, you felt bad, you didn't explicitly withdraw your consent, but clearly your body language said no, and you didn't want to be there, and after the fact you felt violated and terrible, was that rape? And that was roaring through the column, and there were lots of letters pinging back and forth. And the letter ran in my column from a reader describing that sort of situation. She went to her women's studies professor and said, "Here's what happened. I was a little drunk but not wasted. And I didn't say no, but I didn't want to do it. And I wasn't comfortable, and afterwards I felt violated. And da-da-da-da-da, and I regret it. And I said to my women's studies professor, 'Was I raped?' And she said to me, 'Yes, you raped yourself.'" that floats around as Tumblr as I told a rape victim that she raped herself, when it was a woman quoting her women's studies professor's comments to her. But because it was in my column, it runs completely removed from context.
That's what I try to tell people. So, thank you.
But if I'm the enemy, then